Jesus, heal what no one sees, the wounds that silence my soul. Some wounds do not announce themselves. They do not arrive with tears, panic, or collapse. They settle quietly and change the way you breathe, the way you trust, the way you pray. You keep going, people keep seeing you function, and life keeps asking more of you. But something inside grows quieter every day. Not peaceful, just silent. This silence is not strength. It is not maturity. It is often the soul learning how to survive without being seen. You did not decide to hide. You adapted. You learned that explaining was exhausting, that hoping again felt risky, that speaking honestly could cost more than staying quiet. Over time, the heart learns to whisper instead of speak. Faith continues, but it becomes careful. Prayers continue, but they become shorter. You still believe in Jesus, yet parts of you remain untouched because they were never invited into the light. This video is not here to expose you. It is here to sit with you in that quiet place, not to rush healing, not to demand answers, but to acknowledge what has been ignored for too long. Jesus does not heal only what is visible. He heals what no one else ever noticed. And before healing happens, something more important begins: being seen without having to explain. When pain learns to whisper, pain rarely begins in silence. In the beginning, it tries to speak. It shows up as restlessness, irritation, sudden sadness, or a heaviness that feels unfamiliar. At first, the soul sends signals, hoping someone will notice, hoping something will change. But when those signals are misunderstood, minimized, or ignored, pain adapts. It lowers its voice. It learns that being loud does not guarantee care, and being quiet feels safer than being disappointed again. This is how pain learns to whisper, not because it healed, but because it learned survival. You keep showing up. You keep fulfilling responsibilities. You keep answering when people ask if you are okay. And because nothing visibly collapses, everyone assumes you are strong. Over time, you may even start believing that yourself. You stop checking in with your own heart. You stop asking why certain moments feel empty, or why joy feels distant even in good seasons. Silence becomes normal. Numbness becomes familiar. Whispering pain is deceptive because it does not demand attention, does not interrupt your schedule. It lets you work, serve, believe, and function. But beneath that functionality, something vital is being slowly restricted. When pain whispers, it drains life quietly. You may still laugh, but it costs more energy. You may still pray, but your words feel careful, measured, incomplete. You are not rebelling against God. You are protecting yourself from hoping too deeply. Many people confuse this state with maturity. They say they have learned not to expect much. They say they have accepted reality, but acceptance is not the same as healing. Endurance is not the same as peace. A quiet soul is not always a healed soul. Sometimes it is a tired one that learned how to stay invisible even to itself. Jesus never praised pain for being quiet. He never asked wounds to be more disciplined. Throughout the Gospels, he consistently noticed what others overlooked. He saw the woman who touched the hem of his garment without speaking. He saw Zacchaeus before anyone else thought to look up. He saw the grief of Martha, even when her theology sounded correct. Jesus paid attention to what was restrained, not just what was expressed. If your pain whispers today, it does not mean it is weak. It means it has been patient longer than it should have needed to be. It means you have been carrying weight without complaint, absorbing disappointment without protest, adjusting your expectations instead of tending your wounds. That kind of strength is costly, and Jesus does not admire it from a distance. He responds to it with compassion. There is a moment when whispering pain reaches its limit, not with an explosion, but with exhaustion, a quiet realization that continuing this way is no longer sustainable. If you are listening to this and something inside you feels recognized rather than explained, that is not coincidence. That is awareness returning. Pain does not need to scream to deserve healing. It only needs to be seen. And the one who hears whispers has been listening all along. The version of you that learned to hide. There is a version of you that did not exist at the beginning. It was formed slowly, without ceremony, shaped by moments when being fully yourself felt unsafe, misunderstood, or too costly. This version did not appear out of rebellion. It appeared out of wisdom mixed with fear. It learned when to speak less, when to explain nothing, when to smile instead of clarify. It learned how to remain present without being exposed. Hiding does not always look like withdrawal. Sometimes it looks like competence. Sometimes it looks like spiritual language used fluently, emotions managed carefully, reactions kept under control. This version of you learned how to be acceptable, reliable, and strong. It learned how to read the room, sense expectations, and adjust accordingly. Over time, that adjustment became automatic. You no longer noticed when you were filtering yourself. You just felt tired after being seen. This hidden version carries memories the visible version does not touch. Disappointments that were never processed. Longings that felt inappropriate. Questions that felt dangerous to ask. Instead of confronting them, you learned to store them quietly. You told yourself that faith required restraint, that maturity meant moving on, that revisiting pain would only reopen wounds. So you kept going, but parts of you stayed behind. Jesus never confused hiding with holiness. He never asked anyone to shrink in order to be accepted. When he called people, he called them out of trees, out of boats, out of crowds, out of patterns that kept them unseen. Not to expose them, but to restore what had been buried. He spoke to the parts of people that had learned to disappear, even when those parts were well defended. The version of you that learned to hide is not your enemy. It protected you when you needed protection. It helped you survive seasons that required endurance more than expression. But protection has an expiration date. What once kept you safe can later keep you distant. Distance from others, distance from joy, distance from God in ways you cannot explain, only feel. Hiding changes how you experience faith. You still believe, but you believe from behind a wall. You still pray, but you pray with caution. You still trust Jesus, but you offer him the parts of you that feel manageable, not the ones that feel fragile or confusing. Not because you doubt his goodness, but because you learn to doubt what happens when you are fully seen. Jesus does not force hidden doors open. He waits. He notices patterns. He listens to what you do not say. And when the moment comes, he invites rather than demands. Not come forward and explain yourself, but come closer and let me see you. Healing does not begin when you stop hiding. It begins when you realize you no longer have to. If something inside you feels exposed by these words without feeling threatened, that is important. That is the hidden version of you recognizing safety. Jesus is not asking you to abandon protection overnight. He is asking you to trust that what once kept you alive does not have to define how you live now. Faith that keeps functioning. While the soul freezes, there is a kind of faith that does not collapse when life becomes heavy. It adapts. It memorizes the right words, maintains the right habits, shows up consistently, and keeps moving forward. From the outside, it looks strong, disciplined, even admirable. But inside, something subtle begins to happen. The soul stops responding. Not in rebellion, not in disbelief, but in self-preservation. Feeling becomes risky, so numbness feels safer. When the soul freezes, faith becomes mechanical. You still know what to say about God. You still understand truth. You still recognize Scripture. But the connection feels distant, as if belief is happening somewhere above the heart instead of within it. You are not questioning God's existence. You are questioning whether closeness is still possible without reopening pain you learned to control. This freezing often begins after unanswered prayers, delayed promises, or seasons where endurance replaced joy. You told yourself that faith was not about feelings, and you were right. But somewhere along the way, you interpreted that truth as permission to disconnect emotionally. You learned how to stand firm without leaning in. You learned how to trust God's sovereignty without expecting tenderness. Jesus never asked for functional faith. He asked for living faith. Faith that bleeds, doubts, hopes, and rests. Faith that can weep without shame and rejoice without suspicion. When faith keeps functioning while the soul freezes, the problem is not belief, it is safety. The heart does not freeze because it lacks truth. It freezes because it fears disappointment. Many faithful people mistake this state for spiritual maturity. They say they have learned not to rely on emotions. They say they have grown beyond needing reassurance. But spiritual maturity does not eliminate sensitivity. It refines it. A frozen soul does not feel peace. It feels controlled. It feels stable, but empty. Faith becomes something you carry instead of something that carries you. Jesus consistently addressed this kind of faith with gentleness, not correction. He did not accuse Thomas of disbelief. He invited him to touch. He did not shame the disciples for sleeping in Gethsemane. He acknowledged their exhaustion. Jesus understands the cost of staying open in a world that teaches you to guard yourself. He does not demand that you thaw instantly. He offers his presence as warmth. If your faith still functions, but your soul feels distant, you are not failing spiritually. You are protecting something tender. Jesus is not threatened by that protection. He stands close enough to soften it, not with pressure, but with patience. And when the soul begins to thaw, it does not rush back into feeling. It learns, slowly, that it is safe to respond again. The prayers you stopped finishing. Somewhere along the way, your prayers began to change. Not abruptly, not intentionally, but subtly. You still start them, you still speak to God. Yet there are sentences you no longer complete, requests you hesitate to finish, words that dissolve before they fully form. It is not because you stopped believing God can answer. It is because you learned how painful hope can be when it stretches too long without resolution. Unfinished prayers are not a lack of faith. They are evidence of memory. Memory of asking with expectation and waiting without clarity. Memory of trusting deeply and feeling exposed when nothing seemed to move. Over time, the heart learns to edit itself. It keeps prayers safer, shorter, more general. Not because God is distant, but because disappointment taught you restraint. These prayers still rise, even when incomplete. God hears the sentence you never finished. He knows the request you paused before naming. Scripture reminds us that even wordless groans are understood in heaven. Silence does not cancel prayer. Hesitation does not weaken it. The prayers you stopped finishing did not disappear. They settled quietly inside you, waiting for safety, not answers. Jesus was never uncomfortable with interrupted prayers. He listened to cries that ended in tears instead of words. He responded to faith expressed through touch, posture, and presence. He knew when someone stopped speaking not because they had nothing to say, but because they had said too much before and were tired of waiting. When prayers go unfinished, something important is happening beneath the surface. The soul is protecting itself from reopening expectations it does not know how to hold anymore. But protection is not rejection. It is a signal that the heart needs reassurance before it risks honesty again. Jesus does not rush unfinished prayers to completion. He sits with them. He allows them to exist without forcing clarity. And over time, what was paused begins to breathe again. Not because circumstances change first, but because trust begins to return. The prayer does not have to be finished for Jesus to respond. It only has to be offered, even partially, even quietly. Emotional bruises without a memory. Not every wound has a story you can point to. Some pain exists without a clear beginning, without a single moment that explains it. You search your memory for a reason and find nothing dramatic enough to justify how heavy certain emotions feel. This kind of pain is confusing because it feels real, yet undefined. It lingers without an image, without a name, without a clear cause. These are emotional bruises formed over time. They come from repeated disappointments, subtle dismissals, unspoken griefs, and small losses that never felt important enough to grieve properly. Each moment seemed minor on its own, but together they left a mark. The soul remembers what the mind cannot organize. You may not recall the moments, but your body responds to them. Certain words feel heavier. Certain situations drain you faster. Certain hopes feel unsafe. Because there is no clear memory attached, these bruises are often dismissed. You tell yourself you should be over this. You assume you are being sensitive or dramatic. You push through, believing that real wounds require clear trauma. But Jesus never measured pain by how easily it could be explained. He never asked people to justify their suffering before responding. In the Gospels, Jesus often healed people who could not explain how long they had been hurting, or why it began. He did not need a timeline to offer compassion. He did not require a diagnosis to respond with mercy. He recognized pain by its presence, not by its origin. Emotional bruises without a memory often surface as fatigue rather than sorrow, as hesitation rather than fear, as distance rather than anger. They shape how close you allow people to come and how deeply you let God speak. You may still desire healing, but you do not know what to bring forward. So you bring nothing, hoping time will take care of it. Time does not heal what is never acknowledged. Silence does not dissolve pain. It only teaches it how to stay hidden. Jesus does not need you to remember everything in order to heal something. He only needs your permission to touch what hurts, even if you cannot explain why it does. If something inside you resonates with this, it is not because you are broken in a way you cannot fix. It is because there are places in you that were bruised quietly and never given space to recover. Jesus meets you there, not asking for clarity, but offering care. Why silence felt safer than being seen. There comes a point when the soul quietly decides that silence is safer than exposure. This decision is rarely conscious. It forms after moments when honesty led to misunderstanding, when vulnerability was met with advice instead of presence, when sharing felt heavier than carrying things alone. Slowly, the heart learns that staying quiet protects it from disappointment, judgment, or the exhaustion of explaining itself. Silence begins as a refuge. It offers control. You choose what others see and what remains hidden. You learn how to manage conversations, how to redirect questions, how to keep things light. Over time, this control becomes familiar, even comforting. Being seen feels unpredictable. Silence feels manageable. You do not feel lonely at first. You feel protected. But protection has a cost. What begins as safety slowly becomes isolation. Silence keeps pain contained, but it also keeps connection at a distance. You can be surrounded by people and still feel unseen. You can be faithful and still feel alone with God. Silence reduces the risk of being hurt, but it also reduces the possibility of being known. Jesus never pressured people into visibility. He noticed them first. He saw the woman at the well before she spoke honestly. He saw the man born blind before anyone asked for healing. He did not shame silence. He responded to it with attention. Jesus understands why silence feels safer. He understands what it costs to be seen when you are unsure how others will respond. Silence also shapes prayer. You begin to talk around your pain instead of through it. You choose words that feel appropriate rather than true. Over time, even God feels distant, not because he moved away, but because silence built a wall you forgot you constructed. The soul does not want to be hidden forever. It just wants to be safe before it risks visibility again. Jesus does not break silence with force. He invites it open with presence. He stays long enough for trust to grow. He speaks in ways that do not overwhelm. When silence feels safer than being seen, it is not a sign of weak faith. It is a sign of a heart waiting for gentleness. And Jesus is gentle enough to wait with you until silence no longer feels necessary. Jesus and the pain you never explained. There are pains you have never explained to anyone, not because they are insignificant, but because language fails you when you try. You would not know where to begin. You fear sounding confused, dramatic, or ungrateful. So the pain stays unnamed. It exists as a weight, a tension, a quiet ache that follows you through ordinary moments. You live with it without ever giving it a proper sentence. Jesus is not limited by explanation. He does not require clarity before compassion. In the Gospels, he often responded to people before they fully understood their own need. He read posture, tone, avoidance, and silence. He noticed when someone lingered at the edge of the crowd instead of stepping forward. He knew that some pain cannot be organized into words without falling apart. Unexplained pain often creates distance in faith. You still believe, but you hesitate to bring everything to God because you are not sure how to present it. You wonder if it even belongs in prayer. You assume God responds best to clear requests, strong declarations, confident faith. So you bring what feels acceptable and leave the rest untouched. Jesus does not need you to translate your pain into proper language. He already understands the parts of you that feel disorganized, conflicted, or unfinished. He does not wait for you to explain yourself well. He meets you where you are, even when you arrive without words. Healing often begins before understanding. Jesus frequently healed first and explained later, if at all. He restored bodies before giving theology. He offered presence before answers. He knew that clarity is not always the doorway to healing. Sometimes healing creates the space where clarity can eventually grow. If you have been carrying pain you never explained, you have not failed spiritually. You have simply reached the limit of language. Jesus is not frustrated by that limit. He steps into it. He listens beyond words. And when he touches what you never explained, something shifts. Not all questions disappear, but the weight begins to lift. You are no longer carrying it alone. Letting healing enter. Without understanding everything. There is a quiet belief many people carry without realizing it. The belief that healing requires understanding first. That clarity must come before restoration. That if you cannot explain what happened, why it affected you, or how it should be fixed, then healing must wait. This belief keeps many souls suspended, faithful but hesitant, hoping for answers before allowing themselves to rest. Understanding feels safe because it offers control. If you can explain the wound, you feel less vulnerable to it. If you can trace its origin, you believe you can manage its impact. But the soul does not heal through logic alone. Some pain is healed through presence, through trust, through being held without being analyzed. Jesus never demanded full understanding before offering restoration. In the Gospels, people came to Jesus with fragments, partial faith, confused motives, mixed emotions. He did not ask them to organize their inner world before approaching him. He accepted what they brought, even when it was messy. Healing often began in the middle of confusion, not after it resolved. Letting healing enter without understanding everything requires surrender, not ignorance. It is the decision to stop postponing care until clarity arrives. It is the courage to admit that some things may never make complete sense, and yet can still be healed. Jesus does not heal because you understand him fully. He heals because he loves you fully. This kind of surrender feels risky. It means allowing Jesus access to places you have not labeled, wounds you have not defined, questions you have not answered. But Jesus does not misuse access. He does not rush the process. He heals at the pace of trust, not comprehension. When healing enters first, understanding often follows gently, not as a sudden revelation, but as peace that settles before explanations do. You may still carry questions, but they no longer dominate your inner life. The soul finds rest even while the mind continues to wonder. That is not spiritual weakness. That is faith deep enough to rest without needing to know everything. Jesus, stay where it hurts the most. This is where everything becomes quiet again, but not empty. There is a difference between silence that hides pain and silence that makes space for presence. What you have been carrying does not need to be rushed out of your life. It needs to be met. The deepest wounds are not healed by removal alone, but by companionship, by knowing you are not alone in the place you avoided the most. Many people ask Jesus to take pain away quickly. That prayer comes from exhaustion, not lack of faith. But there is another prayer, one that rises when the soul is ready for something deeper. Jesus, stay here. Stay in this place I never showed anyone. Stay with what still hurts, what still feels unresolved. what still makes me careful. Do not leave just because it is uncomfortable. Jesus does not withdraw from pain. He entered it fully. He stayed in the tension, the suffering, the unanswered moments. He understands what it means to remain where it hurts. When you invite him to stay, you are not asking him to prolong pain. You are asking him to transform it from the inside. Presence changes what explanations cannot. This kind of prayer is not dramatic. It is honest. It does not demand immediate relief. It asks for companionship, for nearness, for the courage to stop running from what feels fragile. When Jesus stays, pain loses its power to isolate. It no longer defines you. It becomes a place where love meets vulnerability. Healing does not always look like everything feeling better at once. Sometimes it looks like being able to breathe again, like not flinching when certain memories surface, like trusting that you are safe even when emotions rise. When Jesus stays, the wound no longer belongs to you alone. It becomes shared, and what is shared with him cannot destroy you. If you reached this point, it is not because you are strong enough. It is because you are ready to be honest without fear, ready to let Jesus see what no one else saw, ready to stop surviving in silence. Jesus is already here, and he is not leaving the place that matters most.